HOA Karen spray painted my fence to match the neighborhood. Living in this HOA neighborhood was always a balancing act. On one hand, I loved my house, my yard, and the quiet street. The trees were tall and lush, the sidewalks clean, and the houses all had a certain charm. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes in the evenings, and neighbors waved hello when they passed by. On the other hand, there was Karen, the self-appointed ruler of our cul-de-sac and the HOA president. Karen had a knack for turning every interaction into a lecture. It wasn't that she sent letters or formal notices all the time. No, she preferred personal comments, dropped like tiny landmines whenever she spotted you outside. Her tone was always sweet, but her words carried a sharp edge.
You know, your garage door is looking a little faded,
She'd say with a fake smile. Or,
most people around here stick to more traditional garden decorations.
as she'd eye my solar-powered garden lights, just her usual way of asserting dominance. For months, I'd brushed off her remarks, focusing on my own space. But one afternoon, standing in my backyard and staring at the worn-out, weather-beaten white fence, I decided it was time for a change. The fence looked tired, dull, and out of place next to my green lawn and blooming flowers. It was the one eyesore in an otherwise well-kept yard. I hopped in my truck and headed to the local hardware store. Wandering through the aisles of paints, I was greeted by rows of color swatches, whites, creams, tans, but none of them felt right. I wasn't interested in blending in. I wanted something light but refreshing. That's when I saw it. A shade called Coastal Breeze. It was a soft, light blue with just a hint of gray, modern but calming. I held the swatch up and pictured it around my yard. It would make the space feel cooler and more open, like a little oasis. I weighed my options for a while but kept coming back to that blue. The HOA guidelines vaguely mentioned neutral and natural tones recommended, but nothing prohibited soft blues. I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen would have something to say about this, but frankly, I didn't care. It was my yard, my fence, and I knew my rights. The next morning, I prepped the fence, excited to get started. The sky was clear, the weather perfect, and as I began rolling on that first coat of light blue, I could already tell it was the right call. The color popped against the greenery without screaming for attention. It felt like a breath of fresh air. But just as I finished the first section, I felt eyes on me. Turning around, I saw Karen standing near the sidewalk, hands on her hips, lips pursed in disapproval. She didn't say anything, yet she simply stood there, staring as if willing the color to change. I sighed, knowing this was only the beginning. Karen finally broke the silence.
That's an unusual color choice,
She said sharply.
You know, most of us around here prefer more neutral tones.
I set my roller down and wiped my hands on a rag. It's within HOA guidelines, I replied calmly. There's no rule against it. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes.
Well, it's not exactly in harmony with the rest of the neighborhood, is it?
I could already feel the argument brewing, but I wasn't about to let her ruin my mood. I like it, I said, and it's staying. With that, I turned back to my work, but I could feel her lingering a few moments longer before storming off in a huff. Over the next few days, Karen's passive-aggressive comments escalated. Whenever I was outside, she found some excuse to walk by.
Some people don't care about community standards, I guess.
She muttered once. A few days later, she cornered me while I was unloading groceries.
You know, there's still time to repaint that fence before the HOA meeting. I'd hate for it to become a topic of concern.
But I stood firm. My fence was painted, it was staying blue, and I wasn't violating any official rules. Then came the day everything boiled over. One Saturday morning, I woke up early, planning to do some yard work. As I stepped outside with my coffee, I froze. My heart sank. My beautiful light blue fence was now entirely beige. A single, flat, dull beige sprayed evenly across the entire surface. I was furious. I stormed around the side of the house to check if the damage extended all the way. And it did. The entire perimeter of my yard had been defaced. I instantly knew who was responsible. Before doing anything else, I rushed inside, powered up my computer, and opened the feed from my security cameras. My stomach turned as I saw the footage. Karen. There she was, clear as day, caught by the infrared camera. Around midnight, she snuck into my yard with a large canister of spray paint, covering every inch of my fence with the bland color. I sat there in disbelief as she finished her handiwork and strutted away like she had just done the neighborhood a favor. I couldn't let this slide. I picked up the phone and called the police. When the officers arrived, I showed them the footage. They nodded, their expressions serious but professional. "We'll handle this," one of them said. We walked over to Karen's house together. She answered the door with her usual smug smile, but it faltered when she saw the officers standing behind me.
Can I help you?
She asked, her voice dripping with false politeness. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about an incident involving your neighbor's property," one officer said. Karen's face turned from smug confidence to shock as the officer's words sank in. She looked like she couldn't quite believe what was happening.
I'm the HOA president. You can't arrest me. I'm just doing my job,
she protested, her voice rising.
This neighborhood is supposed to have standards, and your fence was an eyesore.
The officers didn't budge. They remained calm, but there was no mistaking the authority in their voices. "Ma'am, trespassing and vandalism are crimes, regardless of your position in the HOA, the first officer said firmly, pulling out his handcuffs. "You can explain it all to the judge." Karen's hands trembled as she backed away slightly, her mouth working as if she was searching for some way to wriggle out of the situation. She must have realized there was no way out, because her next words came out in a rush, almost pleading.
You don't understand. I was just trying to make it right. The neighborhood needed it to match. I'm only looking out for the community.
The second officer, a bit taller with a more serious expression, shook his head. "That's not how this works, ma'am. You don't have the right to just walk onto someone's property and paint their fence without their permission." I stepped forward, trying to remain composed, but feeling the relief of seeing Karen finally being held accountable. "You did this without my consent," I said, the frustration from the past few days bubbling to the surface. "This isn't about community standards, it's about you overstepping your authority. My fence was fine before you decided to fix it. Now you've destroyed my property. You're going to be held responsible for that." Karen's face went pale as she realized that no amount of pleading or deflection was going to stop the officers. They had the evidence, they had the footage, and they weren't backing down.
I didn't mean to,
she started, but the officer had already stepped forward, taking her by the arm. "Ma'am, we're placing you under arrest for trespassing and felony vandalism," the officer announced as he gently but firmly applied the handcuffs. "No, this is ridiculous."
No, this is ridiculous. You can't do this. I'm the HOA president and I know people.
"You can't do this. I'm the HOA president and I know people." But the officers didn't respond. They simply led her toward the patrol car, her protests growing fainter with each step. As the police car pulled away, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The nightmare was finally over. The petty war with Karen was done. I had stood my ground, and justice had been served. I walked back into my house, the weight lifting from my shoulders. I had won.